It's only been a couple of weeks since Supercars had their thrilling championship opener around Sydney Motorsport Park, and they're back on track this weekend supporting the Australian Grand Prix. This has quickly become one of my favourite rounds on the Supercars schedule, and there's been no shortage of news over recent weeks, so let's jump into the preview. Our battleground is the famous Albert Park Street Circuit, located just outside of the CBD in Melbourne, and this place has been like catnip for Supercars drivers over the past couple of years since they've reprofiled the track and introduced Gen 3. There's just something about this place that makes the guys go crazy, and I'm all here for it. It's a 5.3 kilometer lap of 3.3 miles with 14 turns in an anti-clockwise direction, and the risk rating around here is hard to put your finger on. It really depends on what part of the track you're talking about, but I reckon it averages out on the high end, at least for Supercars. The lap begins with a fairly decent run into the first couple of corners, an elongated chicane. It darts off to the right before a longer left-hander sets you up for your first short shoot of the lap. That takes you down to one of the key overtaking spots and a real point of congestion on the lap, turn 3, and the battles there often continue through the left-hander of turn 4. There's a bit of tarmac runoff there where we often see the drivers exploiting track limits, but things narrow out once again as you go through the right-hander of turn 5, a very high risk location for the Supercars drivers, and then you're once again keeping the speed nice and high through turn 6 and 7. Turn 8 is pretty much nothing in a Formula 1 car, but it's a hold-on corner for a Supercar driver, and we'll chat more about that very shortly. And they keep the throttle pinned all the way down what's technically described as the back straight, but they are turning pretty much constantly all the way up to the high-speed chicane of 9 and 10. After that, you've got one more short shoot up to turn 11, another key overtaking spot there, and those battles do continue for the rest of the lap through the right-hander of 12, that awkward little left-hander of 13, and the final corner, 14, where we saw Waters and Payne collide last year. In terms of spots to watch, you know me, it always feels like a cop-out when I say turn 1, but I will call it out here at Albert Park because I feel like the drivers get super greedy on the big wide front straight when they start the race, and then things really narrow up into this opening corner. There's a bit of runoff on the left-hand side, some gravel too if you get it really wrong, but generally the drivers are normally pretty hot-headed into the first corner. My second spot to watch is turn 5. This one has seen some big accidents for Supercars over recent years. It's a really loose corner. If they catch the curb on the inside, it can break the car free, and when you're on lap 1 or a restart after a safety car, it gets really congested through here, and you definitely don't want to interlock your wheels with someone. And then my final spot to watch, I flagged it earlier, turn 8. This is a wild place to watch Supercars go racing. They try to get on the throttle as quickly and early as possible through this sequence, but they can't just pin it down because the cars will run out of road. And there's no curb on the left-hand side on the exit either, meaning the guys often dig out a bit of a rut in the grass as the weekend goes on, and it just makes this section of track wilder and wilder every time they go by. Now, given Supercars is basically a support act for the F1 this weekend, the format does look a bit different to usual, at least compared to any other round on the Supercars calendar. The action though does get away nice and early for us. They hit the track on Thursday for practice 1 and 2, followed by qualifying for the first 2 races of the weekend, and we'll see some racing action that very evening at 5:50 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. It's just the one race on the Friday in the mid-afternoon before they get back into qualifying mode for the final 2 races of the weekend on Saturday morning, followed by a race that afternoon and one more, a shorter one to cap it off on Grand Prix Sunday. The weather's looking reasonable for most of the weekend, although it does seem to be declining in quality if you're trackside, with sunny skies on Thursday, followed by partly cloudy conditions on Friday. Saturday, it's going to be mostly overcast, and on Sunday, at least at the time of recording, there's a bit of rain forecast in the air, which could really spice things up, both for Supercars and F1. I will caveat this, as always, though I'm recording this early in the week, forecast can always change, especially around Melbourne, so keep your eye on things over the coming days. There's been lots of news in the championship pretty much the moment the checkered flag fell in Sydney, and one of the big breaking stories was Cameron Waters suffering an engine failure just a day after the final race in Sydney. It was a corporate ride day and the engine let go. Had that happened any sooner, it could have really put a downer on that fantastic opening round for them. Reliability continues to be a focus on the engines as they get a little bit older now that we're into season 3 with these cars. The ugly divorce between General Motors and Triple Eight as they defect to Ford continues to bring plenty of stories. In good news, if you're a GM fan like me, though, it seems like this whole saga has really lit a fire there at GM. They seem to be coming back to the sport with a vengeance, not just that sort of passive passenger they felt like over the past few years. They're talking with different teams to become or to identify who the next homologation team will be, and they're going out securing the people they want in their corner. They've secured KRE to keep building their engines. That was a big one because it sounded like Triple Eight wanted to use KRE for the Ford program, so that was a real point of contention. It looks like Chev have won that battle. They've also got Jeremy Moore from AAA, one of their key technical people. He's going to be sticking with General Motors as they embark on this next chapter. And just today as well, they've announced they've got Craig Lowndes, who will be sticking with them despite AAA, who Lowndes has a long history with, of course, going back to the Blue Oval. Speaking of brands, it sounds like Grove Racing will be sticking with Ford. That was a bit of a surprise given the General Motors news and also the fact Toyota's on the horizon, given that team's been so vocal about their frustrations with the Ford program over the past couple of years. Clearly, they're looking forward to Triple Eight taking the charge. Meanwhile, at Supercars, Tim Watsford, the Chief Operating Officer, has resigned from his role. He was tipped to be the next CEO, so a bit of a loss for the championship there, but they say they've got succession plans in place for that. Chaz Mostert, meanwhile, has done Australia very proud, along with the other Supercars drivers at the Race of Champions held in Sydney just a few days ago. Mostert wasn't even meant to be at that event. He was a late stand-in for a sick driver, and he performed very well, reaching the final up against France. The Perth Street Circuit has taken a step closer to reality, with the Labor government being re-elected here in Western Australia over recent days. It was one of their key election promises, and fingers crossed, all going well for that event in its planning. We'll see it on the calendar from 2027. And on the racetrack this weekend, we've had our first driver change of the season. Aaron Love, who has really been embattled in Supercars since he became a full-time driver in the Cool Drive machine, has been replaced. Dropped after the Sydney Motorsport Park round, Aaron Cameron, another Aaron, will take his place. He's a real Aussie battler story that's well worth looking into and getting behind. He'll get behind the wheel of that Cool Drive car and expected to see out the rest of the season. All right, what about some of the storylines centered on this weekend in particular? Well, it's being a disrupted run-up to the AGP for a lot of Queensland-based teams. They had to pack up their cars a lot sooner than expected to get ahead of Cyclone Alfred, and looks like they've all arrived safely and on time in Melbourne, which is obviously great news for us as fans. Meanwhile, the drivers are really questioning the driving standards following Sydney. We saw a far more relaxed approach to the stewarding there, which gave us great racing, but the drivers now sound like they want a bit more clarity on what they can and can't do on the racetrack. That'll be a real talking point as the racing unfolds. We've seen some new liveries as well. Bryce Forward has revealed a Sure livery, a little green and purple number, and we've also seen a black and gold livery down on one of the Erebus cars. Percat has swapped their chassis. He had a great time in Melbourne last year, but really struggled at the first event of 25 in that vehicle. He really struggled to feel the steering, he said, so they're hoping that will be remedied with the chassis swap. And then finally, the teams are going to be praying they don't get any major damage this weekend, because they've only got a couple of days to turn those cars around and pack them and ship them off to New Zealand for the next round of the championship. Any big crashes could mean some very long days and late nights for the teams, so fingers crossed it's a reasonably clean weekend. I'm really boiling up in my studio right now, so I'm going to fly through the last section of the show where we get into some predictions. As always, these are just a bit of fun, but I try to give you some logic behind them. I'm predicting Brody Kostecki will get a win this weekend in DJR, his first one for the Blue Oval. Maybe a little bit ambitious given the struggles that team's had over recent years, but it was a fairly respectable start in Sydney for them, and despite their struggles last year, Shelby Power Racing still went pretty good around Albert Park at times last year, so we'll see how it pans out. My second prediction is a bit of a bold one. I'm just going to throw it out there and see if it sticks. I'm going to say that Team 18 gets announced as Toyota's second team for next year. My logic behind this is that you've got the big international stage. You could really elevate that announcement, but of course we don't even know if Team 18 is going to be that second team just yet. And my final prediction is an unfortunate one. I reckon we will get one non-race, whether that's something that's instantly red flagged or the schedule just gets compressed and there's only a few minutes of racing. Unfortunately, it's just the way the cookie crumbles when you are the support act for Formula One. We'll finish up with some of your predictions. Thank you as always congrats to everybody who took part. First one here from SC saying Waters to be strong like he was in Sydney, Kostecki to get a podium, and one of the AAA cars to have a massive moment throughout the weekend. Aggression is going to be really interesting at the AGP. I feel like with the finals format, you can get away with, a bad race early on in the season like we are. But also with New Zealand on the horizon, I wonder if the drivers are going to sort of peg it back a little bit so that they don't give their teams that repair job we talked about. It'll be really interesting to see how hard they push. Spencer here says Grove Racing to pick up a win and Percat to either get a win or a podium. Both of these, I reckon, are pretty good shouts. Grove had some promising pace around here last year. Of course, it did end in disaster in one of those races in particular. And Percat, of course, did pick up a victory as well. The place really seems to catch his eye, so it'll be interesting to see if they can rebound as well. And then for the final prediction, I'll just pull a piece out of what Sam Cooper shared here that he thinks one of the races will have a red flag interruption. You know what? It really wouldn't surprise me, especially at turn 5 where the track can get blocked easily and the Tech Pro barriers often need repair after a big shunt. I think that could be a real hotspot for a red flag. But fingers crossed, like I say, we see some complete racing. Of course, it's not just supercars on track. The real headline this weekend will, of course, be Formula 1 for their opening round of 2025. They'll be supported by F2, F3, and Porsche Carrera Cup will be there as well if you want a bit more tin top action in your life. Enjoy this weekend of racing. It always feels like the year's really started when the AGP rolls around. As I said, it is one of my favorite supercars rounds on the schedule as well. We just always seem to get incredible action. So fingers crossed, we do get more of that this year as well. Let me know your thoughts down there in the comments section. Treat people like your trackside, and I'll be back in a few days' time to talk about everything that goes down in those 4 supercars races.